It says, my wife and kids have Native American ancestry and are members of a tribe. How do we balance encouraging our kids about their cultural heritage without approving of the false religious beliefs that are strongly intertwined in that culture? Seems like the person asking this question already recognizes what I believe is the most important distinction, and that is that there are perhaps cultural elements of being a Native American, perhaps that are like about how you dress or music or I don't know, artwork, for example, that might be morally or religiously benign, okay? But then there are also religious elements and religious beliefs and practices that might be contrary to your biblical values or your biblical worldview. And the fact that you're asking this question already shows that you recognize the difference between those two things, and that's key, right? When I think about this question, it actually reminds me of my own situation, and that is I'm ethnically Assyrian. I'm 100% ethnically Assyrian. My parents were born in Baghdad and lived, half of their lives in Iraq, and then they immigrated to the United States, and then I was born and raised mostly in the United States. And so even though I grew up in the States, I still grew up with a family culture that integrated a lot of our Assyrian elements into my life and my upbringing. And so those are very important. I speak Assyrian. My language is, it's a part of who I am. Now, when I got married, I ended up marrying not an Assyrian woman, because there aren't that many Assyrian women around, but I married an American woman, and she's ethnically German. And so when we got married, we had a wedding that included some elements of my Assyrian heritage. Now, Assyrians historically, although they historically have been Christian, they've typically been part of what's called the Assyrian Church of the East, which is kind of like an Eastern Orthodox style of church and worship and some of their teachings. And so I don't, as a Protestant, really buy into all of those religious elements. And so when we got married and had our wedding ceremony, we incorporated some things from my Assyrian heritage into that wedding. But there are parts, like, for example, there are these blessings that are part of the Assyrian blessings. Not all of them were biblical, to be honest. And so I didn't want my pastor or anybody at my wedding kind of proclaiming those blessings on me because I felt they were unbiblical. And so I had to separate those out. But yet, when it came to, say, the food that we ate, I think we had lamb meat. And when we did our dance time, we did some Assyrian style of dance. And so again, we are making a distinction between sort of benign cultural components from some of the unbiblical religious things that I thought were not legitimate. And it sounds like you're recognizing this already in your question. And so I think the way to navigate this with your kids is simply to be able to just identify the components that are part of your culture and heritage that are fine, and from those that are indwelt with religious meaning and that might be problematic, And I'd say the best way to do this is to be very diligent students of both your Christian convictions and your Christian worldview and biblical theology, but also be diligent students about the religious components of whatever your Native American tribe believes. And as you become diligent in being students of both, it'll be obvious then what parts you can keep and what parts you can't keep. And then you just, of course, explain that to your children.